Good afternoon. I'm Cleo Franklin, founder and CEO of Franklin Strategic Solutions and also author of Coffee with Cleo leadership book. Today, I'm very excited to have a very esteemed guest and colleague, someone I've known for a while. I'd like to introduce you to Thomas H. Warren Sr. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Urban League of Nebraska. And Tom has quite a background. Let me just spend a few moments to share some things with you. Since he's taken over in his tenure with the Urban League of Nebraska, he's transformed the organization from 15 full-time employees and operating in a deficit of a budget to over 34 full-time employees, 24 part-time employees, and a $3 million operating budget in cash reserve. That's fantastic. Now, before Tom joined the Urban League, he was Omaha's first African-American chief of police. And during his tenure, he was able to improve police community relations. He also enhanced the professional image of the city of Omaha 4 consecutive years and reduced the crime rate. In 2007, Omaha Police Department was recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice as the local law enforcement agency of the year. That's quite an accomplishment. For its Project Safe Neighborhoods, its violence reduction strategy, and more. So Tom is also a graduate of Morningside College. He has his master's degrees as well. And I would like to introduce, of course, with no further ado, Mr. Thomas H. Warren Sr. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Cleo. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Tom, you are in a unique position, and a position that I feel is quite, I would say I haven't met many people that have served as the chief of police for a city, such as yourself, but also the CEO of Urban League. Both those particular organizations, one nonprofit, one public, but both service-oriented. I'd like to know, working for both organizations, how have they informed your strategy and also your perspective in not just police relations, but also socioeconomic issues dealing with the community?
Well, thank you, Cleo. And, you're right in terms of, in light of our current set of circumstances, I do have a rather unique background and perspective. First, let me just say that I'm a native and born and raised here in the city of Omaha, Nebraska, a city of 450,000. So it's a kind of a mid-sized metropolitan community. I grew up in North Omaha, predominantly African-American community, where I also worked primarily my entire professional career in law enforcement, and where I currently serve as CEO at the Urban League of Nebraska. That being said, I've always considered myself a servant leader. And a servant leader, you're driven by that mission to serve the community, a community that has been very generous to me, I might add. And so even in my professional role, I was always engaged in volunteer service and working within my community, just trying to give something back, whether it was time, talent, and or treasure. And was fortunate enough, not only in my first career in law enforcement, but as I was transitioning to have an opportunity to serve here at the Urban League of Nebraska, a community-based civil rights organization that really allowed me to continue to serve the community in those areas that I had an interest in, which is education and youth development, employment and career services. But we are a traditional civil rights organization, and so it allows me to also engage in some advocacy in and around issues like education reform, juvenile justice reform, but those other social justice related issues. And so I've been blessed and fortunate to have as an occupation, 2 vocations that were really aligned with my core as an individual, but certainly just being service oriented really allowed me to find a job that I derive so much fulfillment and satisfaction from that it would almost be in lieu of compensation.
Well, I believe, Tom, it is just noble, especially when someone is purpose-driven and service-driven like yourself. I think the rewards and the value, without question, one has to appreciate the monetary returns, but there's also greater value delivered beyond monetary. So I think it's absolutely impressive what you've done, which leads me to the second question for you. You know, this platform really gets into not just leaders and how they lead, but how they address, and of course, the challenges that it comes with the role of leadership. And what I'd like to ask you and take you back in your former role as Chief of Police of Omaha, what probably were one or two major issues when you transitioned to the position, and how did you address them to basically turn things around and make them successful?
So first, let me suggest that I spent 24 years in law enforcement in a number of different roles and capacities. But prior to becoming chief of police, I served as commander of the Northeast Precinct. And again, this is a community where I was born and raised, and I grew up in. My family and my friends reside in Northeast Omaha, and I had a vested interest in not only my professional role and responsibilities, which were primarily reducing crime and violence. You wanted to have a safe, secure environment where your residents had a peace of mind and some sanctity and quality of life. And so I understood what my role was as a police officer. But at the same time, you treated people with decency, you treated people with respect. There was a whole different level of accountability for me because I was from the community, I was from the neighborhood. Not only did I work in the community, my family and friends reside in the community, but I would also spend time outside of work in the community. And so when you talk about community policing, it took community policing to a whole nother level, just in terms of my relationship with the citizens that I served. And then, of course, having an opportunity to serve as chief of police, where the responsibility was citywide. But I never lost the focus or the drive or the orientation of being really community oriented. And so had an opportunity to retire and transition to another career. And because I had done a lot of volunteer work, the Boys and Girls Club, I had served on various boards as well as nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations. The Urban League of Nebraska appealed to me. And coincidentally, I was once a scholarship recipient. Urban League of Nebraska. So, I'd gone full circle when a job was open and available because it would give me an opportunity to continue my service in a community that not only I have a tremendous amount of affinity towards, but it would also, as a service provider, allow me to continue to address many of the issues, the underlying issues like poverty, very complex social and economic issue. But I also felt that, when you talk about crime and violence, it's symptomatic of the underlying issues of poverty, of undereducation, of underemployment or unemployment. And so I felt that if we could strategically address those underlying issues, those root cause issues, that it would have a direct or indirect effect on reducing crime and violence. Yes. And so I kind of felt, believe it or not, that I could do more in this role as CEO of the Urban League and reducing crime and violence and improving the quality of life for the residents in North Omaha than I could as chief of police. And so we set out to develop a very comprehensive strategy of addressing those underlying root cause issues that contribute to poverty and other inequities and disparities that we experience.
Tom, it reminds me of a quote that I have, and it says that good leaders must not only enjoy the ride on the ship, but they must know how the ship works. And also did not take a renter's mentality, but an owner's mentality to a situation. And you being from the area, growing up, and understanding fully the dynamics of the community, without question, have served you well. And I want to commend you for not leaving, but coming back from college and staying there and of course, prospering. You know, this brings me to a second question for you. We hear discussions around police reform. And in your tenure as, of course, chief of police, crime was reduced. You were recognized for that. What are your thoughts on police reform today? And with both hats on, chief of police and also CEO and president of the Urban League of Nebraska.
Well, Cleo, you know, obviously we're all still reeling somewhat from the very repulsive acts that occurred in Minneapolis and elsewhere around the community, around the country, with regards to excessive force, particularly the murder of unarmed African-Americans, African-American males, in the case of Breonna Taylor, African-American female. And so, you know, as a former law enforcement executive, you know, not only do I find it repulsive, but almost embarrassing, quite frankly, when you know that there's no resemblance of any professionalism being displayed by former officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, or even those of his colleagues that stood idly by while he engaged in, you know, what was a sadistic act in the murder of George Floyd. And ultimately, I think you'll see him face the consequences. But in terms of how I would observe and assess police reform, I had the good fortune of serving as a commissioner on a body called the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Executives. This is a national organization, Cleo for short, the acronym, where it is a body of standards for the best policies and procedures in law enforcement. There are roughly 1,200 agencies accredited by Cleo out of 18,000 local, county, state, university police departments. So a small percentage of agencies that adhere to and comply with those best practices in law enforcement meet the accreditation standards. And accreditation, like in higher ed or in the medical field, you know, you're accredited as a standard of excellence. And so I served as a commissioner on this body where we would review agencies for national accreditation. They had 450 standards, everything from use of force, managing your personnel and internal affairs. And so you would have an early warning system that would be a red flag for officers like Derek Chauvin, who had 18 citizen complaints, which is a lot for any police officer. Body worn cameras, these kind of controversial issues, but there's this body of standards and policies. And so when there are conversations about national certification, you know, most law enforcement is local or within that respective municipality or jurisdiction or state that governs or determines the policies and procedures for that particular agency or organization. But those agencies that adhere to best practices, the 1,200 agencies, I could tell you, it never ceases to amaze me or surprise me when you have incidents that occur around the country and you can look and see which of those agencies are accredited versus those that are not.
Okay.
And to suggest that it's coincidence, no, it's more than just a coincidence, because the agencies that do adhere to the voluntary compliance with best practices, and I'm not saying that it never occurs, but there's certainly the level of accountability and compliance with those policies and procedures and best practices that tends to distinguish those agencies from those that are not accredited.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Tom, the Urban League of Omaha, of course, in Nebraska, has been in establishment since 1927 and very much ingrained within the community from, of course, our fair housing practices, working with unions for, of course, to increase equity and employment. The mission today really is to bridge these socioeconomic and education gaps within the community. And my question for you, how has that been essential for your ability, of course, to turn the budget around, to create funding, but also to bring a community aligned in one singular focus to basically use the Urban League of Nebraska as a vehicle to provide hope for the next generation of leaders?
Sure, we've been really fortunate here in Omaha, Cleo. I'll start by saying that at the time I transitioned from law enforcement to the nonprofit sector, it also coincided with an effort here in Omaha, a grassroots mobilization called the African American Empowerment Network. And I have a dear friend and colleague, Willie Barney, who had this vision that we would develop a comprehensive strategy to address many of the challenges that we were confronting here. And Omaha is not unique other than, being in Nebraska, than any urban community in the country. And we were also dealing with an outbreak of gang and gun violence that was afflicting our youth and young adults.
Right.
And so he had this vision that we would develop a multidisciplinary approach to improving socioeconomic conditions in our community, really focusing on education and employment, business development and entrepreneurship, health and housing. And we had a number of community partners, community-based organizations, elected and appointed officials, and we started working in a very collaborative manner to address the issues as they affected African Americans in Northeast Omaha, working with our school districts. And as an organization, the Urban League is a service provider. And so we could develop programs to address many of these issues, as well as through program administration, really be responsible for achieving the desired outcomes. And so focusing in on education, we've seen graduation rates improve, enrollment in the post-secondary improve, graduation from post-secondary improve. Our unemployment rate for African Americans pre-COVID went from 17.2% in Northeast Omaha to under 7%. And it was one of the most dramatic reductions in unemployment rate for urban community in the United States of America. Our crime rate was reduced significantly, in addition to the overall crime rate, gun violence. So we were able to allocate funding, convince our city leaders through community block grant development dollars to fund our summer youth employment program. And so it grew over the past few years, but now the mayor earmarks $1 million for a summer youth employment program. And you may recall the old CETA programs, the comprehensive employment training, that many of us, that was our first job. Well, we replicated that approach where over 700 youth are employed part-time during the summer months. And as a result, we had an 80% reduction in gun assaults in the summer months of June, July, and August compared to 5 years ago. And it's been sustained. And our work, not only in terms of with our corporate community, our corporate partners, they serve as volunteers on our board of directors, as well as our employer partners. And so when we need work sites for our youth and young adults, we have that level of cooperation, and it's facilitated in part because of Urban League's relationship with corporate Omaha. And so we are able to get the support from our donor and philanthropic community. They see the measurable results and outcomes of our efforts, and it has had a significant impact on improving the quality of life here in the city of Omaha, particularly for those who historically have been underserved.
You know, I just a couple questions for you, because what you're hinging on is this partnership and making sure that the community takes a holistic approach to ensuring that not only is today is better, but tomorrow will be even brighter. And it takes everyone working together and building this coalition around aligned goals and, of course, a strategic vision, which the question I have to ask you is, based on this platform and the book is about leadership insights and lessons learned. And personally, what is a lesson that you learned during your career and possibly have learned recently that you can impart upon the audience that is listening to this interview?
Sure, and that's, you can build capacity through collaboration. And we know that, you know, as an organization, we could not have achieved these outcomes alone, but it took a tremendous amount of cooperation. It took a tremendous amount of coordination and support. It happened to be at a point in time, as they say, when the stars align. And you had individuals in leadership positions that didn't allow their egos to interfere with their ability to work with one another. And admittedly, many of us were personal friends. And so some certain dynamics had changed in terms of individuals who, quite frankly, had been in leadership roles that were not as willing to cooperate, would not only in terms of make necessary sacrifices, but, you know, you have to build those relationships on the basis of mutual respect and trust. And there has to be genuine collaboration where, you know, no one is being motivated by their own personal self-interest or being self-serving, but actually looking at, you know, what is the greater good? And so recognizing that, you know, we had some dynamics in terms of synergy, we had common goals and objectives, and more importantly, there were individuals that were willing to put in the work, as they say.
Well, the work must happen and the work continues, Tom. My last question for you really has to do with the generational connection. We have the next generation of leaders who are Gen Zs and millennials. You're in a great position to impart some experience upon this group of people, and not just being successful, of course, in law enforcement and criminal justice, but what you're doing today. You attributed and shared a quote with me today about that your sister has coined, and I hope you don't mind, I would like permission to use this quote, but the quote says, "When young people have no hope, consequences do not matter." My question to you is, what is it that you can share for those young people or those organizations that are trying to establish hope by serving the community? What are some lessons, one or two lessons that you can share to make sure that they understand there is hope, so therefore there is consequences to decisions you make, of course, to control your future and make sure that it'll be brighter than it is today?
So, you know, obviously, you know, what we've seen with the recent demonstrations and the protests has been this tremendously diverse composition of differences of age, gender, race, ethnicity. But what they've had in common is grievances, complaints, concerns. And where I recognize that there are some intergenerational differences in approaches to affecting change. And I've always been about results. And so my approach is through advocacy and working within institutions to affect positive change. Others may choose to be activists and engage in public protests where they're engaging in these public demonstrations. And my concern is that, you know, we don't lose sight of the message when engaging in these protests, because sometimes they do deteriorate into civil unrest. And so to keep your eye on the prize and to stay focused on, let's deal with the issues, let's translate these words into action so that at the end of the day, there's demonstrable change that has occurred. And so just creating a platform where these youth and young adults, where you can have genuine, authentic conversations. And more importantly, for our generation to listen to their concerns. And then let's try to find some common ground where we can address these issues and implement some of the recommendations.
It's a great construct. I adhere to what you're speaking about, especially having an objective and being performance related. You know, if the action that you take does not move you forward or move the needle forward or move you towards your goal, if it takes away or if it enhances your ability to get to the goal, then I think the decision process will be informed in the things that you will do. Tom, I want to thank you very much for spending time with me and in the audience with Coffee with Cleo. If someone is looking to support the Urban League of Nebraska, how will they be able to do that? And is there a website that they can go to?
Sure, we can be contacted at www.urbanleagueneb.org. That's our website. You know, we, as you mentioned, we've served this community for 97 years, and we are affiliated with the National Urban League, which represents 90 affiliates in 36 states, including the District of Columbia. So just about every urban community in the United States has an Urban League affiliate. And I have colleagues in a network of CEOs nationwide, and that we're all in the business of trying to make our communities a better place to live.
God bless you, Thomas. I appreciate you. Again, proud alumni of Morningside College and University of Nebraska of Omaha, and native of Nebraska, and still making sure that he does all he can to move the community forward in a direction that is going to be positive and brighter for those that are looking for a greater tomorrow. All the best, and thank you for having Coffee with Cleo. Take good care.
Cleo, it's been a pleasure visiting with you. Have a great day.
You're welcome.